Welcome to this episode of the Wellbeing Room. I'm joined today by Kimberly Ashton from Key Food Therapy. Kimberly is a Sydney-based holistic wellness coach. She works with people to help support them through transitions and with their health goals. Her background is in traditional Chinese medicine and food therapy related to that, as well as macrobiotics, and she's also a very good cook. She lived in Shanghai in China for just over 16 years, I believe, and had her own health food store there and a cooking studio. She's trained both Western and Chinese chefs in this style of cooking that she loves, and has also been dabbling with teaching kids and children, I believe. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Kimberly. Hi, Kimberly.
Hello, Leah. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I always love talking about my favorite topics.
Is there anything you wanted to add to that intro?
It was a great intro, actually. Covered a little bit of everything. My main passion is to share food, what I call food therapy, as opposed to just nutrition. My background, as you alluded to, was in Western nutrition, but I always found that there was more than just proteins and fats and carbs, although it's a great place to start. I personally feel that there's a lot more that nature has to offer in the fresh foods that we get to enjoy, and by understanding the way that they grow in the seasons and the cooking styles, we can really increase our health or elevate our health beyond just putting food on a plate and fueling ourselves. So more than fuel.
Yeah. So those nuances. Yeah, I'm really interested to hear more about that approach. And that's something that I've also been looking into throughout my life, having studied macrobiotics as well. So I'm always interested to meet people who have also delved into that. And it sounds like you've delved quite deeply into that as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. And I'm sure our listeners are too. So firstly, I'd just like to ask you, what in particular led you to become a holistic wellness coach and made you want to specialize in food therapy based on traditional Chinese medicine?
Well, at the time, I didn't know. But looking back, and it's more fun looking back, right? And in hindsight, I was drawn to nutrition and health. I've always been a food person. In the past, not so healthy. I just ate. And I did actually see food as fuel, and was very active in the gym and boxing and very what we call yang activities. So I loved, never got into running so much, but aerobics, boxing, karate, step aerobics. Like I was very, very physical and active. And so I would just eat everything because I was like, I'll just burn it off. It's fine. And I was living in Shanghai at the time. And then I started exploring Chinese medicine, which seemed like a good idea being there. And so at the same time, it was about the same time and concurrently, I was training to be a Western nutrition coach. And then I was experimenting with Chinese medicine herbs, and my TCM doctor and traditional Chinese medicine doctor and acupuncturist was making suggestions for me. And I loved the individual nature of Chinese medicine because she was, tell me things that I didn't see in a textbook in a Western nutrition sense. And it made sense. So I started very early on putting them together, really. And that just snowballed. And after I started doing some coaching in Western nutrition, predominantly around food, I started to realize that there was more. And the 5 elements, which is what Chinese medicine is based on, and all the acupuncture and massage and reflexology, it's all based on the same principles. The 5 elements really made sense, first and foremost. And they were fairly easy to apply. I know that there is a lot of depth to them, so for some people it's a bit overwhelming, but just starting, seasonal foods or colors or flavors, and so that's what drew me to do that, and just the general nature to want to help people, but starting with myself.
Yes. We always start with ourselves, don't we?
Absolutely, because you can see the results. There's there's only so much that any practitioner or doctor or acupuncturist can tell you, but unless you actually start to eat that way or change your lifestyle habits or sleeping time or whatever it is, or herbs or teas, you start to feel it and see it in your body. That's the best way, because then you can help other people in future.
Yeah. So I'm interested to, you said about how this TCM therapist doctor, she could really see it on an individual level, whereas you seem to think that the Western approach was maybe more general. Like, can you talk a bit about that?
Absolutely. And I'll give you some examples, would probably be the best. So for example, if you want to lose weight, it's actually one of my least favorite topics, but we'll go with that. Just came to my mind.
It's one of the most common topics, though.
It is, yeah. So in Western nutrition, I mean, there's different approaches, and there is some individuality to it, of course. But in Chinese medicine, we would start with a holistic approach rather than stop eating food or eat less, which is the main thing, or eat no carbs or exercise more. It's very reductionist in its view, and we isolate things, and they do work. I'm not saying that I use Western nutrition every day, but this holistic approach and this individual approach is something that classically Chinese medicine practitioners and acupuncturists would spend more time talking to you about. So for example, they would consider, is there anywhere in the body or organ system that you're holding on to the weight? Like, is there an emotional or a physical reason? Are you overly stressed? Is your digestion not working? Is your liver metabolism not working? So we start to see the body as a system, and it's almost like putting the puzzle pieces together to get to the bottom of what's going on, rather than just, of course you can eat less. Most people can, and exercise more. But some people perhaps don't need to do boxing class and very more cardio or aggressive types of exercise. If they're highly stressed, maybe that's the reason why their body's not shedding the weight. So in that sense, it could appear to be more complicated, but it's this sort of system, holistic approach, and then looking into the individual's life and what's going on, rather than just saying, everybody, 10 people who want to lose weight, we all go on the same diet. Might not work for everybody.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I know there's a lot of Western research and interventions into weight loss where they put people on, this program, but then they also trial it with some psychological intervention or other things. So there's definitely benefits to that. But I think what I see here is we're actually looking at the body as a system, and you might be overweight because you're suffering some sort of liver condition, or it's your bowels are blocked, or other things are going on, and it might be even an emotional thing. So we need to sort of, I think what the approach is, what I'm hearing is that it's really looking at those nuances within each individual and seeing where there's things out of balance. So is that where the 5 elements then come in? Yeah. So another example could be, another popular one would be, or common, let's say, not popular, but it would be sleep issues. I get a lot of people come to me as well with mainly digestion issues, but that can be a little bit more complicated. But, sleep issues. So in a Western sense, again, there's so much research now and wonderful work on how to treat sleep issues, whether it's getting to sleep or not sleeping properly, or adrenals, or being wired all the time, which a lot of people are. And so again, combining the Western and the Eastern approach is very powerful. So in the Chinese medicine context, we would look at, well, is it getting to sleep that's the problem, or sleeping and then waking up, and then what time you're waking up? That all correlates to potentially a certain organ system that's out of balance. A lot of people will go with one example, because there are many different cases, to have trouble getting to sleep. So that is most commonly an overactive liver, because there's this understanding in Chinese medicine of energy. So we see the body as energy, we see the organs as energy, we see the different times of the day as energy, foods as everything is a energy, or qi. Or ki. So for example, not getting to sleep quickly or easily would be too much upward energy, and your mind is thinking and you can't switch it off. Very common one for people. So there's many ways you can do alleviate that, with whether it's acupuncture or some yoga or meditation or reading a book or turning off your computer or whatever it is,
to understand this energy cycle and switch it off.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know there's people in my yoga clients who definitely have that problem. They can't switch their brains off. For me personally, though, I find that I wake up in the middle of the night. I don't actually have trouble going back to sleep, though, but I do find that I do wake up between like 1 and 3 a.m. And I know that's like liver time.
Liver gallbladder, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like, but it was interesting because I've just taken some time off work, and the first week on holidays, I didn't wake up at all. I just went right through, and I was like, this is awesome. That's the first time that's happened in ages. So the body
is smarter than we think, and it will always go back to balance. So for example, when you're off work, your body's like, yes, finally, and then just enjoy it. For some people, it takes a few days. Like people go on holiday, and if they go to a nice hotel or a resort and they can't switch off for the first few days because they're still wired, but and then they might be able to relax more. And then some people get really sick because the body just goes into healing mode and says, oh, we can finally get sick now because you've been pushing us That's physically, emotionally, mentally for so long. So there are many different circumstances, but we do need to understand that the body is always trying to get back to balance, and that's one of the beauties of the 5 elements is it's about cycles, and it's about balance of each element or each organs in the body.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Now, you mentioned qi or ki in what you were talking about then. So, and your business is called Qi Food Therapy. So can you give us an explanation for those that perhaps don't know what qi or ki is?
Yeah. So for the yogis watching or listening, prana is the other word. There's many words for it. And ki or ki would be Japanese, and qi or chi would be in Chinese. So it's pronounced like CHI or CHEE, depending how you want to pronounce it. But yeah, so qi or ki is essentially energy. There's many different types of energy in Chinese medicine, so different types of qi. But for English speakers, the simple way is just energy. And that can be applied to energy, from the sunshine, or energy from the liver, or energy from our immune system, or energy from food. So if we just simplify it as energy, it's pretty easy to understand as a general concept. And for those who might have tried some acupuncture, or if you're an acupuncturist listening or watching, you'd know that there's many different types of qi that can be broken down into or labeled according to the organ or function. So Chinese medicine can get quite detailed in types of energy, which is one of the beauties of it as well, because as I said earlier, we're all energy. So the fact that the lung has its own energy and the spleen has its own energy, and kidneys and all of the organs is a good thing. And acupuncturists really understand this, on how to harmonize or rebalance that, because we tend to overwork them.
Yeah, I just find that so fascinating, like, because I'm sure for most people we don't really consider the organs inside our body until something goes wrong with them. And just knowing that, well, actually each organ has its own energy, that's just blows my mind to begin with. And that's something, since I first started along this holistic health path, that was something that really interested me, especially with the yoga that I studied and teach. And just getting more connected to the energy inside my body and how that affects how I feel and everything. And you actually just prompted a question in me, and it's about food, which is your topic, or one of your many topics, and about the qi in food. And I just was watching something yesterday, and it was showing how even back in the 1980s, the amount of fresh fruit and vegetables that people were eating was so much greater than what it is now. It's been replaced with all these processed foods. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about energy and food, and processed foods versus real food, as I'd like to say, and how, even though both have energy, what's the quality of that energy, and how does that impact on our digestive system and our well-being?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and you've nailed it already with the quality of the energy, because there is different qualities. So you could say, let me think. So if I was to pick we'll start with the extremes, because ideally we eat it in the middle or in balance. But a not so nice energy, or we could say even a dead energy, would be things that have been like microwaved or zapped, or processed food, which actually we'll start there, because that's
That's extreme.
highly processed.
Yeah, like
some
a pack
people,
of crisps in the supermarket in a foil packet that's been sitting there for months. Yeah.
The longer the shelf life, the less energy or life force there is. So if we start to think of qi or ki as life force, so at the other end of the spectrum would be, as you mentioned, like fresh whole foods. So I don't know, a beetroot or a carrot growing under the sun in a farm. Doesn't matter if it's, ideally if it's organic, it's even better because the energetic quality is 100% natural. If it's being sprayed with something that's slightly one step back, but it's still whole fresh carrot or beetroot. And it's getting sun energy. It's grown in nature outside. It's getting all the elements in there of the water and the sun and the earth. And then we pick the carrot and then we put it, I don't know, into a frozen food company or a tin or a jar. Then that loses some of the energy, if not a lot of the energy. And then if we process it all the way to, I don't know, carrot chips, you can get these veggie chips these days. Still healthy, everything's relative, but it's further removed from that whole fresh carrot that was in the farm, in the soil. So the further we get away from its natural state, it loses its energy. And then at some point, once we've processed it, and if we go to potato chips for another example, they're very far away from, you know, a fresh potato that you make yourself into chips or mashed potato, and you're adding a lot of chemicals, preservatives, colorings, MSG, not so healthy salts, flavorings. So there's not much energy that it's giving you. There's a lot of flavor and satisfaction and crunch in potato chips. They're a good comfort food, but that's just a good mix of salt and fat, really, which food companies have figured out.
Yes, they have.
So, but in terms of just energy, absolutely whole and fresh is best. And then cooking it yourself and preparing it, that's still processing it, but it's in a wholesome, nourishing way. So going back to the canned food or the processed foods, even frozen foods to some extent, I'm not against those foods. You could definitely include them, but just purely on an energy level, if you were eating organic beans or frozen organic vegetables, that was your diet, and they were on paper, they were healthy, there's less energy than getting it fresh from a farmer's market. You can see it, you can feel it, you can, smell it, you can crunch on the carrot, like it's bursting with flavor and energy and life, compared to something that's been sitting too long in a can or a packet or a box.
So thanks for that little explanation about ki and chi. I say ki because my business is called the Center of Ki.
Yeah, no problem.
That's all good. But I'd be interested to hear more about, the 5 elements, and I'm sure our listeners would like to. We've talked about, them in a more sort of abstract way, but maybe you can go into a bit more detail about what each of those elements are briefly, and when and why and how. I'll leave it at that and let you take it from there.
Sure. So, we've talked a lot about the 5 elements, but I haven't actually said what they are for people who aren't familiar with them. They're the 5 elements of nature. There's other systems out there in natural medicine or Ayurveda or other healing modalities, which will have 4 elements, but that doesn't matter. They're just elements in nature, different viewpoints, that's all, on how to categorize them. But in Chinese medicine, the 5 elements are the wood, fire, earth, metal, and water elements. And at their foundation, they're elements of nature. And then you can take that and apply it to the seasons. So I know we're used to 4 seasons, but the 5th season would be a late summer, which is the earth element. And traditionally in Chinese medicine, that was actually in the middle as a transition in between each of the seasons. But anyway, there's 5, and then they can be applied to 5 colors. So if we go around again, it would be green, red, like an earthy orange, silver or white for the metal element, and dark blue or dark purple or black for the water element. So we can apply that to food, we can as well. And then there's flavors. So you can have 5 different flavors, which actually all traditional cuisines incorporated into cooking. So if you think of grandma or great grandma, they just knew intuitively how to pair foods and flavors or use condiments to create meals that had all those 5 flavors. And the 5 flavors are sour, bitter or spicy, sweet, pungent, and salty. So we tend to eat too much salt and sugar in a Western diet, actually in all diets, even in Asia these days. It's very salty and then very sweet. And we kind of miss the flavor palette or the spectrum of spices and sourness and people just get a little bit narrow in their palate, especially if you're eating out a lot or having takeaway or processed food. So the 5 elements are those, and then they can be applied to many different things, not just food, but obviously I connect it most often to food.
So what I find really interesting is that, the 5 elements stem from traditional Chinese medicine. And obviously this was developed, hundreds of years ago, maybe even thousands of years ago in China. And so it's done from observations in that particular climatic zone. So I'm just wondering, how does that translate to other parts of the world? Like in Australia, we have, in some places, it's more tropical, so maybe the seasons aren't so well defined. Where I'm living in South Australia, it is fairly well defined. It's actually, we do have quite distinct seasons. In Sydney, it's kind of a bit depending on, who knows what is going on, and with climate change as well. So I'm just curious, for someone who is wanting to, better understand and incorporate the teachings of the 5 elements, which is something I've been working on myself for a long time as well, is, how do we, I guess, take something that's from a culture that's different from our own and translate it into a location and a space and a time that we're in now?
That's a great question, and definitely it is about observation, and that's something that in modern life, and especially in the younger generations, we're not taught to do or conditioned to do. It's about following, okay, we've got to eat this, or and that's why people look to celebrities or books or magazines or external sources for what to eat, when really we should be tuning into, well, what does my body need today or tomorrow? So in that sense, so the 5 elements, and say Chinese medicine, as well as Chinese medicine, food therapy, and even to an extent macrobiotics, has in the past, from what I've observed and seen and experienced, been a little bit more towards the traditional Chinese ingredients, whether it's herbs or foods, or a macrobiotic menu, let's say. However, it was never the intention. It's just that's what people grasp onto because it's easy, and then you can just do copy paste, and then you can start eating with the 5 elements. But if you do it, I guess, more thoroughly, and you start using your conditions and your brain a little bit, which people don't like doing sometimes. I don't want to think either. You just want to make something. But if we apply just the principles of simply seasons and flavors, you can apply that to a Western kitchen or a Western supermarket just as easily. So it's not about having Chinese food or Japanese food or Asian food for that matter. You can apply the principles of energy, of flavor, colors, seasonality to any cuisine. So you could do it if you're in Italy, you could do it in South America, you could do it in India. Like every country or every continent has its own ingredients and staples. So it's not that everyone has to eat rice or brown rice. That's what a lot of people who jump into, especially macrobiotics, will think, oh, we have to eat brown rice and miso soup. Well, you can, it's great for you, but it's not the point. And you certainly don't want to be importing all these ingredients. Try and find what's local. So for example, in Australia, there's wonderful brands now that sell local Australian seaweed. And I'm like, well, every country and every continent has seaweed, or what has it, and it used to eat it, but we don't. It's making a comeback. So we don't have to just buy Chinese things or Japanese things. Another example is I found in a farmer's market a wonderful supply that has the Chinese red dates, the Jujube dates, and they're grown here in just outside Sydney. So I get excited by those kinds of things because I can apply some of the ingredients and some of the principles to a local producer. It means it's better for me because it's in the environment that I'm living in. It's not being imported or shipped from far away. And food and nature intended us to eat things that were local and seasonal to help us adapt to what we need. So that's
a really good point as well, because if they're growing it locally, well, it's obviously saving food miles, and it's going to have better ki because it's in your vicinity.
It's
and
fresh.
It's fresh. But it's also, I believe that those Jujube dates actually have some medicinal qualities as well. So can you maybe mention about that and how you use that?
So there's a lot of foods that fall into the medicinal category or tonic or tonifying category. A lot of them are just sort of everyday herbs and plants. The jujube date is obviously not an everyday food that people are familiar with in Australia. They're an everyday food in China. And so they're similar size to a medjool date, which is also not native here, but people are more familiar with those, that brown sort of Middle Eastern date. Not as sweet, and they're very good for the blood, nourishing the blood and the spleen, and also the liver energy. Good for women, especially, good for men too, but especially for women in terms of menstrual cycle. There's not many foods that I would recommend to eat every day, but jujube date is one of those you could hypothetically eat. Like in the West, we have, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. They would probably say have a jujube date a day to regulate your spleen and your liver and your kidneys and your heart, something like that. So that is one of the, I would say, Chinese superfoods for sure, that is just really good for so many organ systems. And Chinese medicine does have an emphasis on cultivating and nourishing and tonifying the organs and the blood. Again, it's not something in Western nutrition that we see. We hear a little bit about it in, I don't know, things like alkaline diet, for example. But another point actually on that note that I wanted to mention earlier is that in Chinese medicine, there is an emphasis on, especially Chinese medicine, nutrition and food therapy, on building health from the inside, building it up. Whereas in the West, for the most part, it's all about detoxing or removing things out, which is good, but you have to be, having the foods that give you good blood or good energy to build it back up, rather than just take things out of the body, because otherwise you're left with nothing.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think I was just thinking about this yesterday, and I was thinking about how people have been eating unhealthily, and creating sickness in their bodies for, many, many years. And then they hit a point where it's like, oh my God, I'm really sick. I need to do something. So I'm interested in that point that you just made about, detoxifying versus, feeding. How do you approach that with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, weight loss and detox are probably my two least favorite words. So it's good that we're talking about it. So if they did come for either of those, but let's go with detox. I always take it to the full word, which is detoxification. It's a more thorough process. And so, yes, absolutely, we remove the foods that are causing us trouble. And I usually start there. It's like, well, where's your starting point? Because a McDonald's eating smoker who drinks 10 beers a day, their detox point is very different to a yoga vegetarian. Their starting point is different. So therefore a detox would involve different things. So for some people to get to, more vegetables and high fiber, that's a huge step. And that would be enough for their detox. And for the yoga vegetarians, their starting point is different. So maybe we could look at a bit of more of a cleanse, or supporting the liver itself, and actually adding things in like herbs and some foods, rather than fasting. And then for some people, if they want to do a fast, that would be their detox. So if that McDonald's eating smoker or drinker was to go straight to a 10-day fast, that might actually cause them some harm. So there's that individual nature again, but absolutely, I would use foods, lots of high fiber, and some nice herbs from Chinese medicine. And I also feel that the missing piece in a lot of detox programs would be the movement, but also the breath. Like we can exhale a lot of stuff out of the body, whether it's physically
you can
or
lose weight just by breathing
emotionally.
out.
Absolutely, we're all holding it in like this. So creating movement and flow. So acupuncture is a nice lazy way to get things moving, but also walking or yoga or qigong or swimming or gentle exercise. It doesn't have to be too hard on the body. But yeah, a very holistic approach.
Yeah, thank you. I'm interested in something you said about the gradual, like, this person who's eating McDonald's and drinking alcohol and, and I think people who want to lose weight quickly, fall into this trap that they can do it quickly. But I think it's really important, and you've touched on that, is that it is a really gradual process. Like, I don't think people sometimes understand that in the way they go about these things, and then they fail and then they fall off the wagon and they just get upset and more depressed and it all spirals and they can't seem to find a way out. So definitely gradual and slow with anything, any health shift that anybody wants to incorporate, because it took you a long time to get to wherever you are. It's not a sudden thing, so we want to ease the body into it, but mainly so that it's sustainable, and it doesn't become just a quick thing. Anybody can lose weight within 2-3 weeks or even a month pretty quickly if you do think drastic things, but it's not sustainable. It's definitely not satiating. You won't feel happy and nourished and full if you're eating lettuce for for forever. And it's not what the body actually truly wants. So I approach detox or detoxification quite gently and with caution, and I actually would encourage people to eat rather than just starve themselves, because most people aren't quite ready for fasting. There's a time and place for it, and some people can do it pretty well, but working towards that rather than shocking the body too quickly. Yeah, and I would always recommend doing a fast with a trained professional or someone who's lots of experience in that area. Yeah,
definitely.
All right, so you obviously love food. So I'm curious, what is one food that you can't live without and why?
So I mentioned brown rice earlier. If I had to,
favorites too.
I'm not good at picking one thing. Terrible at it. So to slightly cheat, I would say complex carbohydrates. I really can't live without whole grains. It's a category. And if I had to pick one, I guess it would be brown rice. If I could pick two, it would be millet and brown rice. Okay. Because you could technically live on those and some vegetables and some protein, and you'd be pretty good and you wouldn't be hungry. And why would I do that? It's a complete food. It's very nourishing. It's got lots of energy, which I need. If you're working or teaching or talking or thinking, which is most people, all day every day, you need fuel for the body. And there is this huge myth around carbs, and it's one of my life missions is to dismantle that myth, because I feel it's a wrong myth. It's one that people are really starving their spleen and pancreas in particular, but also their brains, because humans are designed to have that fuel from good carbohydrates.
That's a really great point, and I'm glad you've brought that up, because I'd really like you to expand a bit more on that if you can. So I've just been listening to an audio book of Fiber Fueled. I don't know if you've heard of that book, but he talks all about, complex carbohydrates and how it's really important for us. And I'm just interested because you just mentioned how, whole grains are good for the spleen. And so I'm just curious, can you expand a bit more on that for people that don't quite understand what that means or why that's important?
Yeah. So complex carbs, and by that, I mean brown rice, black rice, red rice, buckwheat, millet, amaranth, Quinoa is in there.
Oats. Did you say oats?
I didn't say oats. Oats and quinoa would definitely go in there. They don't have as much, especially the quinoa doesn't have as much of the glucose or the good sugar that we need.
It's probably more higher in protein, isn't it?
A little bit higher, but I would definitely put it in there as variety, and I'm all about variety, so people can definitely include that. And it's pretty much a category that 99% of the people I see need to eat more of, and they approach it with hesitation because we've been conditioned to think that carbs are bad. And as I said, that's a myth. It's a quite a sad myth, unfortunately, because we really do need it. And you can actually lose weight when you add brown rice in. There's no fat in brown rice, because you'll stop snacking. I find that people who don't eat carbs, they're always snacking, and they're eating and they're always hungry because there's no fuel going to the brain. So, but in terms of the spleen, so the spleen and the pancreas and stomach, that's one organ pair, and one of the elements. It falls under the earth element, and that's really our core and our being. It's the belly button and everything just around it. So it is our physical center, and it's our energy center. For those that do yoga or qigong or yin yoga, we have different energy centers in the body, not necessarily the chakras, but we've got like our lower energy center, our upper heart, or near the solar plexus and heart, and then the brain. So they're all connected, and we can fuel that by having food, good, wholesome, balanced food, so that all systems are working in the body, starting from digestion. So the spleen loves the sweet flavor, and we get that from vegetables like carrots and pumpkin and inherently sweet vegetables, but also from grains, whole grains. So by having at least one portion a day. I would have 2 or 3, to be honest. I would have like rice or oatmeal in the morning. I'd have same again at lunch and dinner as well. So I can't live without some form of it. It doesn't have to be just rice as well, by the way. So it could be I really love black rice noodles, or quinoa pasta, or brown rice pasta, or spaghetti or macaroni or whatever it is, or wholesome breads as well. So it's not just about eating the grain, but the products of it, and as opposed to white flour and white rice,
as
things
unrefined
like that.
as possible.
So having as much as possible, and you'll actually find you lose weight. It's really to me, it's a no-brainer, but for a lot of people, they're quite surprised when I say, oh no, you need to be. And a lot of people actually aren't eating enough. That's a huge thing I see as well. People are having a salad for lunch with chicken or tofu or whatever it is, and I'm like, are you full? And they're like, no, I get hungry at 3. I have to have a protein bar or a shake or a
grab a
cake
coffee.
Or coffee. And so the coffee, by the way, that doesn't actually fill you up. It just keeps you going, and it's a appetite. It suppresses the appetite a little bit as well. So you're just actually starving yourself. So I'm like, eat more. And I find a lot of people need that permission to eat more sometimes. And I'm like, your spleen and your whole digestive system is running on carbohydrates. It needs some. That's
right.
And you can get it from sweet potatoes and vegetables, but there is an inherent quality energetically, but also nutritionally behind grains. And every traditional food culture in the world has some sort of grain or corn or maize or quinoa as its predominant staple, or wheat, to make those products, whether it's bread or pasta or
Although there would be some extreme examples where that isn't necessarily, like if you think about the Eskimos.
I was just going to say, if you're up in Alaska and you can't grow it, but that's a different condition. And so this is the beauty as well of the 5 elements, not so much even Chinese medicine, but it's living and adapting with where you are in your climates. So absolutely, if all you can eat is like, wild caught seal or salmon or whatever in winter, that's what they do, and that's what they ate traditionally to survive. And then come summertime, they'd have some grasses and vegetables, perhaps some lighter cereal grains or things like that, and that's fine. But that's a very, very seasonal way of eating. For the most part, most humans around the world, no matter where you live, whether it's Northern Europe or Thailand or Tasmania, we eat the same things all year round. And whatever's in the supermarket, whatever it's easy. So there is no seasonality.
There's a curse of globalization, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's highly against this principle of 5 elements. It's just like what's cheap and available and tasty. That's about it.
And it's kind of like been robbed from us as well without us even knowing it, with modern technology and air transport and things like that. So it's really for people to try and rediscover what our inherent nature is, and how we actually are part of nature. I think we forget because we're so closed in with our technologies and things that take us away from nature more and more and more. So even something as simple as we're talking about the 5 elements could be seen as really abstract and strange, and just seasonal eating in itself can be very strange for people to comprehend.
Yeah.
in our modern world.
Yeah. And I mean, the easiest step to do that is grow your own something, whether it's a herb.
Yeah.
If not everyone has a garden, I don't. So, start with some herbs or simple things, little
Yeah.
pots. If you have a garden, then you can grow a little bit more. If you have land, you can grow a lot more. And then you'll find out pretty quickly what grows in what season.
Yeah.
But if you don't have access to that, then of course, your local farmers market, even if you're in a big city, there are so many options for that. And more people looking to growing seasonal foods, and you can support that. So that's a great way to just start into that.
Absolutely. All right. So thank you so much. We're going to wrap things up. I've got one last question for you. So, and because I guess my tagline for this podcast, The Wellbeing Room, is about, improving wellness to get more out of life. So what is one key thing that you can share with our listeners that has helped you to improve your wellness and get more out of life?
For me, it's managing energy. And to pick one word, it would be balance, and finding balance all the time, or coming back into balance, because I'm a very active, busy person. And my natural tendency is to go out and to do and to have that excitement and stimulation. I don't like sitting on a sofa and doing nothing. I know some people do, and that's fine.
That wood energy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's that double wood energy that I have. It's like, So one practical thing I would do is, or suggest, is to start to realize when I personally was, getting too busy, like filling my calendar too much, or just being too busy, because then it gets too busy in the head. So finding balance for me would be taking time to go to yoga, or doubling my hours of yoga, or walking, or quiet activity, because I need it more. Sometimes I find myself, I'll just squeeze in half an hour. I'm like, I probably need an hour and a half or two then. So creating time for balance, first recognizing when I need it, and then scheduling it.
Yes.
And making
then
sure
sticking to the schedule.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's a really great tip. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, finding that balance. And I know the term work-life balance has been, beaten to death in the most recent times, but it's a balance of everything in your life, not just work, but everything that you do. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and food as well. I mean, eating well is a probably one of the best ways to do it. I don't have a problem with the eating well part. For me, it was the other activities, but for some people listening or watching, absolutely just starting to find some more balance with fresh food, seasonal foods. You'll see the shift just in that. Pretty much immediately. Yeah,
amazing. So just to wrap up, I just want to let our listeners, our viewers, know that Kimberly has a business, obviously, holistic coaching business. So if you're interested in exploring the 5 elements with her in a bit more detail, either through a one-on-one coaching session or in one of her online courses, then I will have all her details in the show notes that are with this video or audio recording.
Right.
So thanks so much, Kimberly. It's been great to chat with you today. Really lovely to get to know you a bit better and hear more about what you do and what you're passionate about. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.